Hello, everybody. Good morning, or afternoon, or evening. We hope you have had a great day so far. We will present some great and exciting content in the next hour. Thank you all for joining this webinar. We'll start now. I know a few people are having, I believe, issues via the LinkedIn meeting invite, but they have requested us to record this conversation webinar. So FYI that this webinar is being recorded. A bit of who I am. I'm Prakash Patil, the founder and CEO of AppModZ and makers of QMCLOUD, the no-code platform that we will walk you through today. Also, we have a guest speaker, Mr. Hariram, also known as Hari. He is the CEO of Kyber. He will speak for a few minutes in the webinar about how they use no and low-code technologies in the ops space with their platform. We also have two of our distinguished associates, Mr. Abhinav Gautam, who is the senior backend developer, and Mr. Durga Prasad, who is a DevOps engineer, who will present a few things in this webinar. Okay, so the key takeaways we want everybody to take from this webinar are twofold. One is an understanding and background of how no or low-code technologies have evolved and why we think they will succeed this time around and fuel growth as opposed to lack of growth in the earlier era. Second, zeroing in on one of the categories or use cases of no or low-code technologies, how they can help in the cloud infrastructure space, which is where QMCLOUD platform falls into, and we will give a brief overview and we'll walk you through that. So the agenda is we'll provide a background on low-code technologies, and we will have Hariram, Durga Prasad, and Abhinav share a few thoughts. We'll provide an overview of QMCLOUD and use cases, then walk through, and in the end, we will have a Q&A session. So let's look at how no or low code has come into being and has evolved and where it is today. If you're in IT, I'm sure you know what backlogs are. And most of you also may have felt that businesses are always asking for more, and it is felt that they are always stalled. This is a famous quote from James Martin in the 80s in his book called Application Development Without Programmers. He was an expert in the field of system design, software development methodology, IT engineering, and computer-aided software engineering. He also stated that the number of programmers available per computer is shrinking so fast that most computers in the future must be put to work, at least in part, without any programmers. So you can imagine this was said in the 80s, and we'll see how true that is today. Some of the ideas of simplifying application development caught up in the 80s and 90s. And also Mr. Martin was instrumental in developing many of these technologies. These technologies included the so-called fourth generation programming languages, shortly called 4GL. They were developed from the 70s into the 90s. So 4GL was identified as a non-procedural language, contrasted with earlier generations they were algorithmic or procedural languages. And the term also applies to an approach that looks for greater semantic properties and implementation power. The 4GL application category opened up the development environment to a wider population. And other examples in this category of simplification included computer-assisted software engineering, or so-called CASE tools, and RAD tools, rapid application development. So in the 21st century, 4GL systems have emerged as low-code environments or platforms for addressing the problem of rapid application development in short periods of time. At the time back in 80s and early 90s, most of these technologies faced many challenges and lacked the fuel to grow. We think that this was due to many factors, including over-promising and under-delivering on what they were supposed to do, and the lacked a mechanism or a way to adopt best practices and address the security risks that a non-programmer could not understand in technical terms. And of course, then the internet and the World Wide Web happened, which, as you know, revolutionized everything, and the focus was on the web, new way of delivery of applications and content to users across the world. And now coming into the modern era, on how many things have revolutionized how we think of applications and how they are developed and delivered. Of course, the cloud has revolutionized and has enabled new consumption models. And with the proliferation of smartphones and social media, businesses need to rely on speed to market or time to value. And with the recent advances in blockchain, Web3, and more recently AI, things have changed drastically, where the focus is on newer ideas, more specifically the ease with which we all can make use of AI technologies these days. So this was digitization, and new business models have emerged. Organizations now could no longer afford to live with the same business models or legacy systems to survive. So this has led to the need for businesses to do much more, and they're not able to rely on their IT to be the sole provider or value creation in the digitization journey. And to cap this off, there's a huge shortage of skills in many areas, specifically application development and developers. So also a quick interesting fact or note that in 2012 was the first commercial popular low-code application called Bubble was released. So what is low or no code in today's context? So this term was coined by a research firm called Forrester in 2014, and it emphasizes on visual and declarative techniques as opposed to programming. To understand the landscape for these technologies and applications and what they do and who they serve, it helps to understand and put them into different categories. So Gartner, another research firm, has created a list of these categories. So they range from low-code application platforms that focus on custom application development by abstracting or minimizing coding requirements, BPA and RPA, so business process automation or robotic process automation. So they're geared towards automation, but BPA is more focused on business process, a series of tasks. So for example, a customer onboarding process, and RPA is more for a specific task, like a chatbot where it can answer a specific question from a customer. And the next category is MDXP. It supports cross-platform development and building custom mobile, web, progressive web apps, and including the medium for chatbots, voice applications, wearables, and IoT apps, and more recently, augmented reality and mixed reality apps. The next category is PaaS, which is well known amongst most of the people today, is the platform as a service. And the last one is CADP, Citizen Automation and Development Platforms. So these are geared towards business technologists who can develop a digital solution and are not a traditional software developer in that sense. We think we have a lot going in favor of these technologies this time around, and will succeed and grow exponentially. With digitization fueling the growth in what businesses are looking for, it has created a huge demand for increasing the demand for value creators and look beyond the traditional IT departments. A few research firms call these developers as edge developers or citizen developers, where the value is being created by folks who know how the business works and who their users or end consumers are and what they're looking for. The newer technologies, including cloud, AI, I think satisfies many of the need that were not met in the earlier era for fueling the growth of these technologies. Next, let's look at the no or low-code technology-based systems and what are the common interface or methods or techniques that are in use. So first, they're capable of connecting to different data sources. So starting with as simple as Microsoft Excel, different databases and different complex systems such as Salesforce and ServiceNow, etc. The second is in terms of low-code or no-code technologies, they all have some form of canvas, which is like a drawing board. They have a user has access to shapes, connectors, drag and drop capabilities, flowchart-like capability, and guided wizards. And also they have a predefined data sets, which are either templates or blueprints or set of actions, which makes it easy for a user to create an application or create or automate a business process and so on. Here is an example of an application called Webflow, which can be used to build websites without any programming skills. It supports, as I mentioned earlier, a canvas, a drawing board. A user has access to shapes and images and various formatting and drag and drop capabilities to build a simple website. On the right side, you see a website that can be built very easily. Next, this is an example of UiPath, an application called UiPath, one of the more popular low-code apps where you connect to various data sources such as Salesforce and ServiceNow and build a complete business process and automate it. Here on the screen, you see a customer onboarding application being built. Next, you see a QuickBase, which is used to create a quality control management system with different flowcharts like interface and connection to data sources. Finally, a more complex use case where an application is used to define various inputs like algorithms and testing strategies to fine-tune the accuracy and create support vector machine SVM algorithm-based predictions. So this is a more complex example where a user without any programming skills can build a prediction model. So on the similar lines, there are many more applications, but I will take a minute here to pause and hand over to Mr. Hariram to talk about what he is doing at Kyber with his platform. So give me a second where I allow Hariram to talk. Hari, you should be able to unmute yourself and talk.
That you can hear. I'll just take a few minutes to talk about how we see what we see as the benefits of low-code, no-code automation in general, and also some of the specific use cases that we are seeing from a Kyber standpoint. I'm Hari, co-founder and CEO of Kyber. Some of the core advantages that we see with customers in going through this process is one, it helps improve developer productivity so they can focus on their core activities of developing Java or Python or React.js kind of applications. Two, it helps in bringing security, quality, and other compliance aspects without you having to iterate one maturity level at a time. It also helps in establishing standards from day one instead of you doing it down the road. Those are some of the benefits we see customers see in terms of low-code, no-code automation. When it comes to Kyber, we are a platform that enables all ops in one platform, wherein we bring all of the ops functions like DevOps, DevSecOps, compliance ops, cloud ops, FinOps, and AI ops together. And we start with generally producing, providing continuous improvement through continuous measurement of where teams are, knowing where they are, so they can improve using 350 plus KPIs and 600 plus best practices. Once they have gone through that continuous improvement path, we also help in automation for focused use cases using our low-code, no-code workflow engine. Those use cases are generally around the CI/CD process. If I am a product team and I am developing a product using, let's say, backend technologies like Java, Python, and front-end technologies like React.js, Angular, how do I make sure that I focus on my core product features, and how can the end-to-end CI/CD process, starting from a developer committing a code for it to be built, um, all the way up to your CI process, your dev process, your QA, your performance test, all the way up to your production releases. How can that end-to-end process be automated without you sitting and writing scripts for them? That's the piece that we help automate with our workflows. In addition to the CI/CD automation, you can also establish, user provisioning, service provisioning, or other kinds of manual activities using the workflow engine. We do also integrate with QMCLOUD for infrastructure provisioning of in the CI/CD process. So that way, Kyber and QMCLOUD are also integrated with the end-to-end process enablement. That's kind of a quick overview of how we see the low-code, no-code evolve, and what benefits customers see, as well as some of the specific items that we to establish. What you're seeing on this screen is an example of one such low-code CI/CD workflow, which is developed literally in minutes without much of coding effort from the developers. At this point, I will hand it over to Prakash.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Hariram. I'm sorry I could not hear you first, but I believe the audience was able to, so we will figure out later how to slipstream your voice. But thank you very much. Okay, so let me. Okay, I think you can hear me all. So where we are on this technology trend. So the market of low and no code technologies is currently $30 billion and is projected to grow to $100 billion by 2028. And see the stats. As per the predictions, we will have around 500 million more applications in the next 5 years. That's more than what we have all built in the past 40 years. So as per the research from Gartner, there are two new trends that will fuel the growth for these technologies. The first one is hyperautomation. So hyperautomation is a business-driven, disciplined approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, vet, and automate as many business and IT processes as possible. And this involves the orchestrated use of multiple technologies and tools. And the next one is called composable enterprise. So composable enterprise is where a business is using technology to compose and recompose modular components to create an adaptive custom application ecosystem for changing business needs. So in terms of the vendors in this space, it is not a surprise that we see many traditional vendors like Microsoft, Salesforce, and Google, who are big players in this space, with Microsoft with the Power Platform at the forefront and many other applications such as Dynamics and Office 365 playing a big role in this space. Salesforce with their application platform, but you also see many new faces, including Mendix, Appian, QuickBase, who play into the different categories. And then I predict that there'll be many more vendors in this space who are not even a significant player today. So to summarize, we saw how low or no code came into being in the 80s and what challenges it faced then. And we see the modern era where cloud, digital, AI and ML, and the need for value creators has increased beyond IT due to the severe skill shortage. And we think that this will fuel the growth for these technologies. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and now dive into what we do today to deploy cloud infrastructure in general. And then we will talk about how QMCloud can assist with its no and low code technologies. Let's look at what is done today to deploy cloud infrastructure. So one of the first option is we either use the provider's console. That is a very manual way of doing things and is not scalable and it's easily repeatable. Here you see the AWS console, and similarly Azure and Google, they have their own console-based approach. Second, we see that we can use the provider's native configuration language, which is proprietary and in certain cases requires special skills of programming constructs, right? So on the screen, you see the AWS Cloud Formation. Similarly, in Azure, you have ARM, and there are some third-party languages such as Pulumi, which support traditional programming constructs, but you still have to understand programming constructs and you need to be a very savvy programmer. And the third option is to use third-party tools like Chef, Puppet, Jenkins, Red Hat Ansible, which are mainly configuration or CI/CD tools, but they also support infrastructure deployment using add-ons or modules. So in summary, modern cloud infrastructure deployment is very complex and time-consuming, where the options are not user-friendly and not consistent across cloud providers. Introducing QMCloud. This is the first of its kind and the only no-code platform in the industry or in the market that makes cloud infrastructure deployments easy. With QMCloud, you can deploy cloud infrastructure with no programming experience. It offers various low-code technologies such as Canvas, drag and drop, smart wizards, templates. It generates the code behind the scenes automatically on demand without your intervention. And cloud architects and engineers can define a desired posture with all the guardrails using these low-code technologies. It also provides APIs and is interoperable with various tools for orchestration deployment outside of QMCloud. You can also enable a self-service consumption model to your application developers where you're exposing or providing them with best practices-based reusable templates for various infrastructure. And more importantly, it provides a consistent experience across multiple cloud providers. So let's switch again to the QMCloud use cases and walkthrough. So give me a few seconds. Let me switch to seeing what this QMCloud app looks like. So you should be able to see the QMCloud application. So this is a SaaS version of the application. So let me log in. So once I log in, you're taken to the dashboard of the application. And then here it gives an overview of what you have in your infrastructure. In this case, I have a few resources already deployed to various cloud resources. So you'll see a list of resources here. So let me walk you through a very simple use case first. Just prefacing that I have already configured some prerequisites. So in this case, I have configured something called a stack profile, which is nothing but a definition of which cloud provider I will use. And then what are the credentials to access that cloud provider, including the region that I want to deploy my resources to. So this is a stack profile. So let me switch to a stack. Stack is nothing but an infrastructure, a unit of infrastructure that you can manage and deploy. So let me create a simple stack. So in this case, let me give a name. I define some basic properties, select the cloud provider, in this case, AWS, and select the credentials, and then save the stack. So now I've created just the stack definition. So now to compose the infrastructure, let me open the canvas for that specific stack. So here you will see what I mentioned earlier with the no-code technologies. You see a canvas. It's like a drawing board with, as of now, I don't have anything on the canvas, but on the left side here, you will see a list of all the components that are exposed by the AWS SDK that we connect to. So let me just search for VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, and it's there. And I select that and drag and drop onto the canvas. And similarly, let me take another component called subnet, and let me drag and drop onto the canvas. So now I have two components or two resources on the canvas. Let me just quickly define some basic properties for them. And save that. And let me do the same thing for the subnet. Let me define some basic properties for that. And in this case, I will just specify a name and submit. So I have chosen the cloud provider. I've chosen the cloud resources that I want to deploy, which in this case is a virtual private cloud and a subnet. But I need to do one more thing here. So I need to be able to define the dependencies. I need to tell QMCloud that this subnet belongs to this VPC. So there are different ways to do this, but one of the option is to connect this property called VPC ID of this subnet and create a connection between the subnet and the VPC. So I do that by creating a connection. So this connection defines the dependencies, and it tells QMCloud that this subnet should be deployed onto this virtual private cloud. And that's pretty much I have to do for deploying these components. So once I go through the motions of deploying this infrastructure with save, validate, plan, and apply, QMCloud will connect to the appropriate cloud provider and it will deploy these resources. So that's the very simplest use case where you deploy virtual private cloud with a few resources. Now, doing this, let me show you something. So instead of having to, let me just log in. So here, instead of having to drag and drop onto the canvas, connect them manually, it's a very laborious process. So in this case, I'm using a predefined template of virtual private cloud, subnet, and a few other resources like gateway and routing components. QMCloud has something called auto connections. So I use a template and I click on, let's say, auto connect. And then as you can see, this is one of the exciting technologies that we have where QMCloud already knows the dependencies of these mainly used components, and it connects them for you. So by using the connections, QMCloud is able to make the appropriate connections between different cloud resources. And if I click on connections here, you will see that it already knows these connections. So it knows what component to connect to what component and what properties are the dependencies of that. So this is really exciting. Now, one more thing, let me open. I already have a stack created here. So let me go to the canvas. So this is a full-fledged AWS Elastic Kubernetes Services infrastructure. So this is so in your case, it may be a cloud architect or a Kubernetes architect who may compose this infrastructure from scratch, from ground up, based on best practices and slipstreaming all the required guardrails. But me as a consumer, for example, I am the operations guy deploying this infrastructure, I can just use the predefined template. So here you can see it has all the networking resources, VPC, subnets, all the routing infrastructure, all the policies and control that I need in identity and access management, and then the EKS, the Kubernetes cluster and the nodes. In this case, I have one node. Now it's just a matter of going through the motions of deploying this, and QMCloud will automatically deploy this to the cloud provider. This is really exciting. Now let me talk about a few more things onto the applications here. We have a special announcement to make today. We are releasing an advanced edition of QMCLOUD. We already have a developer edition available as SaaS, but we are announcing an advanced edition of QMCLOUD. So this is primarily geared towards a team with a few people who want to collaborate. So you may have different roles in the companies where one person may be responsible for deploying network. Another person may be responsible for deploying storage or other infrastructure. So the advanced edition will allow you to collaborate with your team, and it allows you to implement role-based access control. So let me switch to the app again and show you some of these capabilities. So the first one is the workspace. So workspace is a logical entity where you can organize your infrastructure. So in this case, I'm using two workspaces for two different applications. So I want to have all the applications related to my CRM business application into one workspace and I want to organize them as, let's say, QA, test, and production as different stacks. And same thing with finance. Now with the workspace and a combination of roles where you can define permissions. So let me open an already defined role here called custom admin. When I look at this, you can see that I can define different permissions. So in this case, I can say, hey, this user which this role is applied to can see all the workspaces, create them, delete them, and so on. And at the stack level, also I can define permission, and I can say, hey, he will have only get permissions, meaning view permissions for that stack. So this level of granularity allows a team to collaborate with appropriate expertise that they have. And the second one, let me go into one of the stacks here. And the advanced edition, you'll be able to use all the capabilities of QMCLOUD, but more importantly, you can commit the appropriate code that is generated by QMCLOUD into a GitHub repository. So in this case, I can define my GitHub repository that I want to commit this code to, and when you do the planning, QMCLOUD will commit all the required code that was generated automatically into the GitHub repository. So for example, in this case, I've already deployed this infrastructure. And this is the GitHub repository that it creates the execution program, and then it creates a configuration file where it has all the configuration aspects of the stack that I had deployed. This is exciting. So as I mentioned earlier, this is typically used for orchestration or deployment capabilities that many organizations may already have outside of QMCLOUD. So you can use QMCLOUD to compose infrastructure and commit the code to GitHub repository, and then you can use GitHub Actions or Jenkins, for example, to initiate your orchestration or deployment pipelines. And let me show you the last component. This is exciting that let me just open this first. So I'm looking at this infrastructure. This is an application that we have already deployed with networking and a few EC2 instances. So when I go to stack details and when I go to the pricing tab here, you're able to estimate the price of this infrastructure, an estimated cost of this infrastructure. In this case, it is AWS. So when I click on get price, QMCLOUD behind the scenes seamlessly is connecting to a pricing API that we have. And it is coming back with the estimated cost for this infrastructure, even before deployment. So you'll see is a lot of it'll give all the details for all the SKUs that cost you. And then also it provides a summary of the maximum price, the minimum price, and the median range price. So in this case, for example, it's telling me that it costs $116 daily cost and hourly cost for these. So this is exciting. Right, most of the organizations are struggling with cost management these days, but it's great to have this feature where you can estimate the cost of infrastructure before you deploy. Hey, I was going to have Mr. Durga Prasad show you the GitHub Actions capability, but I think we're still having some issues around microphones and me hearing them. We'll skip that as part of this for now. Okay, now next is we are also very excited to share with you the coming soon features to QMCloud. So this is really exciting. A lot of customers, existing customers, have asked us about some of these features, but the first one is scan and import. As you know, many organizations have already a lot of infrastructure deployed to cloud. So with this scan and import functionality, you'll be able to scan and import the infrastructure into QMCloud, and you can take advantage of all the capabilities in QMCloud, like visualization, and you can manage the deployments going forward. This is huge. The second one is detection of the drift. So if you had made any changes to a deployed infrastructure outside of QMCloud, QMCloud can scan the infrastructure and can detect the drift of what it knows about the infrastructure and what has happened since then, and you'll be able to reconcile them and report about them. So this is an amazing feature again. And the third one is, as you know, many organizations are very conscious about security and cost policies these days, but using the same no-code technologies, you'll be able to compose security and cost policies. So for example, on the aspect of security, you can say, hey, don't allow any infrastructure to be deployed without, let's say, tags. Right, this is huge. So QMCloud will block deployment of infrastructure if it doesn't adhere to any of the policies that have been defined. And similarly, on the cost aspect, you can define a policy saying any infrastructure cannot exceed a certain amount of dollars, for example, and it will block the deployments and it will warn the user saying this policy was breached, this policy has breached, and it will ask the user to make modifications. This is huge. The next two features, so the application template. So as you saw, mainly the current capabilities are around infrastructure and whatever the cloud providers are exposing via their SDKs, but we will soon also release application templates. So where you can deploy, for example, I want to deploy MongoDB or MySQL or Postgres or a Java app or a .NET application, we'll have the capability to deploy applications using the same no-code technologies in QMCloud. And last but not least, AI-based prompts and render visualization. Using AI technology within QMCloud, you as a user will be able to use prompts to compose infrastructure, and QMCloud will automatically create the canvas for you, and it will render the visualization. And you'll be able to visualize your infrastructure, create them using the prompts, and then visualize using QMCloud. And then you can go through the similar deployment mechanism that I already showed you. And on this topic also, Mr. Abhinav was going to give you a preview of what this looks like. But because we're having the issues of the microphone, handing over the microphone, I'm sorry, we will skip that part and we will post something on our website a bit later. Okay, so this brings us to the next section, but just to summarize, so we saw how QMCloud uses no-code and low-code technologies, and it allows one without any programming experience to deploy and manage cloud infrastructure. It provides consistent experience across multiple cloud platforms, and ultimately it reduces complexity, effort, and cost for deployment, and it simplifies the cloud infrastructure deployment requirements for users. Okay, this brings us to the Q&A session. I think, let me see. I think you should already be able to post questions using the chat feature, but let me see if we already have any questions so far. Okay, I have a few questions here. Let me go through them. but please feel free to post any questions in the chat. The first question is, in what programming language will QMCloud generate the code in? That's an excellent question. So currently, QMCloud generates the code in JavaScript, and we do have plans to add capabilities around other programming languages, but currently it is JavaScript. We are thinking of Python or Go as additional languages that we may support, or sorry, .NET, Python, or Go, and then but currently the answer is JavaScript. The next question is QMCloud available for self-hosting in a customer's data center? Yes, yeah. So the answer is absolutely. So as of now, we have three different mechanisms. The first one is an AWS Marketplace appliance. So for customers who are already on AWS and are comfortable using AWS Marketplace appliances, so you can use QMCloud from there. The second option is self-hosting, and then we will provide a set of Docker containers with all the required software, and you can host it on your in your data center on your infrastructure. And the third is the SaaS version, which is available at app.qmcloud.io, which you can continue to use by a simple registration mechanism. Okay, the third question is, does QMCloud do anything around monitoring? As of now, no. We have the capability to deploy infrastructure and monitor for only the drift, but the underlying monitoring of the infrastructure like CPU, memory, disks, database capacity, and so on. So we don't have those capabilities as we speak today. But that's an excellent question. That makes me think about those capabilities, but we think that there's a strong ecosystem of tools in the market to be able to do that. I think the next question is around, do we have the capability of no code for applications? As of now, we only have exposed all the resources that the cloud providers have exposed. So for example, besides the traditional infrastructure like network and databases and so on, AWS has, let's say, function as a service like Lambda. We do have the capability to deploy any resource that is exposed by AWS, but not in the sense that a fully built application, if you have the code, we don't have that capability to deploy that today. But you can deploy, let's say, compute, in this case, let's say EC2 instances, and you can deploy the applications on those EC2 instances. And we already saw EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Services, where you can deploy the cluster infrastructure and nodes, and then you can either use the Helm charts cloud resource that is exposed currently using QMCloud to deploy the applications, or you can deploy applications outside of QMCloud knowing the cluster endpoints. So in short, yes and no on the application deployment capability. So whatever is available as a cloud resource in AWS or Azure today, you can use them. But fully composed applications, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we'll be releasing some exciting capability around deploying applications. And one more question is, can we use the pricing API by itself without QMCloud? Absolutely, yes. Currently, we don't have that capability to directly access the pricing API, but we'll be releasing that soon, where you'll be able to provide a JSON configuration file with all the resources that you want to estimate cost for, and then you can connect to the pricing API and get the pricing and download the output file yourself, and you can integrate that with other components that you have. Okay, another question I have is around AWS Marketplace. Yes, yeah. So this software is available in AWS Marketplace today. Yeah, please let us know if you need help to find the appropriate appliances and you need any help in deployment of that marketplace appliance. And the next question is around integration with other CI/CD components, CI/CD tools in the market. Yeah, I think as you've exposed an API endpoint, you should be able to connect as long as you have a composed infrastructure in a stack endpoint and you have validated that infrastructure using QMCLOUD. You should be able to call an API and you can apply that infrastructure using that. Or as we showed you briefly, we can commit the code to GitHub and then you can orchestrate using your CI/CD tools using GitHub. So in that sense, yes, so it is interoperable with any CI/CD tool that can connect to either a GitHub repository or it can connect to an API endpoint using REST APIs to QMCLOUD. So this brings us to the end of this webinar. We will post a recording and a link of this webinar on our website. Please feel free to share with anybody you think it may be appropriate. And again, a huge thank you to all of you for attending this webinar and spending your time with us. Bye for now.